I remember the way the sunlight hit the departure board that morning, a white rectangle of schedules and gates like a promise pinned to the ceiling. I had the tickets in my pocket, 2 economy seats to a place that smelled in every brochure of salt and forgiveness. My hand around the boarding passes felt ordinary steady. My chest felt oddly full, like a cup on the verge of overflowing. New wife, new life. A week away from everything that had been small and tired, and our small apartment that still smelled faintly of her perfume, and the last argument we hadn't finished. And then she came into the terminal with an arm thrown around a man I'd met only in photos and half-smiled stories, her best friend. He moved through the crowd the way a man who expects the world to part for him moves, easy, loud, practiced. I watched her laugh while people stepped aside. I watched him whisper something I could not hear, and her face fold with a kind of casual attention that made my stomach go cold. "Ethan," she called with the brightness of someone stepping into a role, "you made it." Her voice was the voice I had married. But when he stepped forward, the air between us changed the way a winter wind changes a lake's surface, turning it from glass to 1,000 unhappy ripples. "Hey man," he said, smile wide, the type that always sits 1 degree too long. "Ready for paradise?" It was a question that sounded like an accusation. My tickets felt suddenly small in my hand. I forced a laugh and handed her a coffee. For a heartbeat, I imagined myself as the protagonist of a small, sentimental film. We would all board, the mistake would be smoothed over with sun, and the ocean would rearrange everything. But the scene was not a film. Reality does not tidy its corners for you. He sat between us on the shuttle to the gate. He told the story about how they'd saved each other's lives in college. She laughed like it was the best story in the world. I smiled until my temples ached. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that insecurity was a choice and I was firmly choosing trust. I had married her because of trust, among other reasons. But trust is not the absence of doubt. It's the courage to choose someone despite doubt and sometimes despite evidence. The first crack came small, like a hairline fracture in glass, an unread message that popped up on her phone when she reached across to show me a picture. The message preview, "You in tonight?" She tucked the phone away with a casual expert movement. Later, when I asked about it, she rolled her eyes and said it was nothing, a vendor, a mistake, a friend from back home. The answer was the type people give when they've rehearsed the lie, too quick, too light. If the airport had a soundtrack, it would have been white noise, announcements, rolling suitcases, the murmur of strangers. But underneath that was a different rhythm now, small impulses of unease, a steady, dull drumbeat in my chest, the shiver of a thought I tried to dismiss, that perhaps there was more to her laughter than love, that someone else weaved through the private world I'd built with her. We landed. The resort smelled of salt and sunscreen and the theatrical citrus of holiday brochures. It was everything a couple's escape should be: palm trees, champagne towers in the lobby, couples taking the exact same photos at the exact same postcard angle. Her friend was somehow always nearby, sharing a taxi, joining a snorkeling group, turning up at a beach bar with a grin like a tag. With every coincidence, my face hardened a little more. Then the ambush at the pool happened. It was the kind of thing movies use as a comic relief. My best man and a circle of college bros, an all-too-familiar lineup of smirks and half-warmed beer. They greeted me with the superficial enthusiasm of people who measure people by the stories they can tell about them. It was childish, performative. They clapped me on the back with a force that said they wanted me to feel included. My wife stood back, arms folded in a way that read less like detachment and more like performance, smiles measured, eyes attentive to his reactions instead of mine. They called it a roast, which is to say, they called it community. The jabs were late-night club levels of cruel. They traded old insults like currency. There were jokes about my upbringing, references to things I'd once been embarrassed about. People laughed in the way crowds do, fast and relieved and unkind. And then someone, emboldened by the noise, suggested a dares game. We were in a resort bar full of people who'd chosen anonymity for the night. The air was humid, and the music was trying to be sensual, which made everything feel like it had edges. "Come on, bark like a dog," he said, voice loud enough for the bar to quiet. "Let's see the alpha." There are moments when your mind acts quickly, when it trims away everything that isn't immediate. In those seconds I could picture the room. Faces, phones, the grainy blue light of somebody's camera, the way laughter turns to a wave that drowns you. I could see myself on the floor, crawling, reduced to a punchline. A man I did not want to be, and yet in the past, in smaller humiliations, I had swallowed and smiled. Tonight, the room waited for me to dissolve. I stared at him. The barbell silence became a test. I thought of every time I had bitten my tongue, every time I had smoothed a conflict to avoid a storm. I thought of the small betrayals, text messages tucked away, secret gifts, subtle disappearances. I remembered the way my wife's hand had seemed to recoil subtly from mine at social gatherings, like someone whose little gestures belonged to an earlier draft of herself. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. "Not today," I said. It was not a roar. It was a sentence that landed like iron. The room leaned in as if to watch a movie that had been promised 1,000 times but never begun, people hungry for drama. My wife's smile faltered, then reasserted itself. He laughed, and it was a laugh that had an edge now, a laugh that said, "Play on, Ethan." They thought I would back down. People usually do. It is the easier path. It is the path that keeps the surf smooth and the picture-perfect photograph intact. But what they could not see was the slow arithmetic I had been doing for weeks, the balancing of small clues that together made a dangerous ledger. That night I did not curl into the role they offered. I left the bar early and walked the length of the boardwalk by myself. The moon was a thin coin above the surf. In the sand, each step left a neat, solitary print. I replayed the last months like a film with the sound turned off, the secretive texts, the receipts for dinners not shared with me, the small hesitant refusals when I'd asked about plans. I took out my phone and scrolled messages I'd copied weeks earlier and hoped to forget, phrases carefully clipped from conversations. Screenshots of a calendar she later claimed never to have seen. I had recorded one conversation with the slightly tremulous logic of a man trying to be sure. It felt vicious in the light of my lamp back at our suite, but truth is often messy. When I returned to the room, she was asleep, curled like a question. The sight of her, unguarded and tender in the dark, would have undone me once, sent me scrambling back into the warm, soft well of denial. But not that night, not after the bar, not after the way they'd lined up to humiliate me like a public experiment. I lay awake and stitched together a plan that was not violent but precise. I would not throw tantrums or call names. I would not climb onto the floor to bark for their amusement. Instead, I would become a quiet cartographer of truth, mapping routes that would leave no alternative narratives. I would gather the messages that contradicted the stories I had been told. I would collect proof like a man gathering combs of honey, slowly, methodically, aware of how sticky things become. I would listen again to the voice recordings I had, to catch inflections that suggested an intimacy in words she had told me was only transactional. I would photograph the discreet gifts I'd stumbled upon, save receipts, and archive every deleted text that time had not yet fully erased. There was a poetry to the violence I planned, ethical, measured. It was not about revenge for the sake of cruelty. It was about reclaiming the narrative that had been taken from me. I wanted to expose the architecture of their betrayal so that it could not be rebuilt into a story where I was the fool. I wanted to make it so that, when the dust settled, the truth would stand in the cleared space like a single, unignorable monument. But plans need patient hands. I knew that haste could turn justice into spectacle, and I'd already had enough of stagecraft. This would be slow, like letting plaster set. Each piece of evidence would be a brick. Each revealed message, a chisel strike. I would not seek blood. I would seek to rearrange the house they'd built on lies. I would not humiliate for the thrill of it. I would show them what their choices had wrought, the collapse of the public image they used as armor. In the morning, I moved as if still on vacation. I packed sunscreen, sunglasses, the same measured smile I'd worn through check-in. I made sure to stand close enough to hear when they spoke and far enough not to reveal any plan. My wife moved through the resort with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to choreography. He was everywhere, a shadow that thought itself charming. They would say later that I was calm, that I was serene. They would be wrong. I was not calm. I was focused, like a hand tightening around a hinge until it gives. When the truth starts to feel inevitable, small things become instruments. A voicemail becomes a file becomes a folder becomes a pattern. I had started to notice those patterns months before, a dull throb under the surface of everyday life. Now the throb had become a pulse. For the first time since the airport, my body did not want to flee or please. It wanted to arrange. That evening I sat on the balcony of our room and watched the resort lights bloom, one by one, like a constellation of petty certainties. The ocean beyond was a dark smear with the occasional flash of a distant boat. I turned on a small recorder and spoke into it, not so much for evidence as to marshal myself. They think they can make me into entertainment, I said. They think they can force me to play. I won't play. I will tell the story so plainly that no one can pretend otherwise. I will not be the punchline. When I pressed stop, the device chirped a tiny, indifferent beep. It recorded everything. That, of all things, felt like a small, private triumph. I am not a violent man, but I am a man who knows the weight of dignity, and that night I decided I would pull back what had been taken. The plan, nascent and fragile, was also a salve. It let me sleep a little. It let me wake with resolve instead of fear. The next day they would swagger and joke and maybe try another test. But by then, I would have begun building a truth that could not be laughed off. I would begin to turn their flirtations into a public ledger. I would gather allies, people who would see the pattern if shown carefully, the families who respected proof more than charm. I would make their world tidy and then, with the deft of a surgeon, open it. I do not expect the fall to be cinematic in the way movies promise. No slow-motion shards of glass, no last-minute apologies with thunder in the background. I expect it to be quieter and crisper. Emails forwarded, screenshots delivered, phone calls made. I expect the subtle humiliation of having to answer questions you cannot answer without revealing the rot underneath. I expect the small collapses that accumulate like rust eating through a beam. That night I folded the evidence into a neat digital stack and labeled it with the clinical patience of someone organizing a ledger. I did not burn bridges, I cataloged them. I left a note on the dresser, simple, unemotional. Taking a walk, it said. She would think nothing of it. She would assume complacency. Let her. As I walked out into the warm night, the resort behind me thrummed with laughter and the indifferent clinking of glass. I walked toward the dark edge of the property where the palms thinned and the path turned toward the rocky coast. I wanted the sea to drown out the chatter in my head so I could think. The waves were indifferent. They did not care whose heart was mending or breaking. In their indifference I found something like clarity. When I returned hours later, she was awake, watching the pale rectangle of her phone screen. She looked up quickly, and for a moment I thought I had mismeasured everything, that maybe I had only been imagining the gaps between us. But then the look on her face retreated into careful neutral, the orchestration of someone used to keeping her own ledger hidden. I lay in bed and watched her breathe. I counted the seconds between inhales and exhales and tried to remember what had brought me to love her in the first place. Love was there, threaded like silver through the whole. Love can live alongside betrayal, and sometimes it is the love that makes the revelation so painful. I pleaded with myself to be humane. The plan I had made was not a crucifixion. It was a rearrangement of truth. When sleep finally took me, it was not a relief. It felt like the temporary dimming of a stage light before the big scene. I kept thinking about the bar, the way the crowd leaned in, how quick people are to turn cruelty into content. They would be watching. They would be expecting spectacle. What they wouldn't expect was the slow, careful method of exposure, the way truth could be more devastating when it arrived neat and undeniable. There are 5 acts to this story, I told myself as I drifted. The first is recognition. The second will be gathering. The third, exposure. The fourth, the fallout. And the fifth, whatever remains after the dust, is mercy, or at least what passes for it in the small hours of the morning when you hold the ledger and count the costs. I do not yet know how the end will look. I only know that I will not be the same man who walked through that airport with his tickets in his pocket. Something in me rearranged that night, quiet, clinical, irrevocable. The games had been theirs. From now on, the moves would be mine. There's a strange stillness that comes after humiliation, a silence so sharp it feels like you're walking through glass. The morning after that night at the bar, the resort was beautiful in the way only oblivious places can be. The ocean didn't care about my anger. The sun rose anyway. Couples smiled for photos, kids ran past with dripping ice cream cones, and somewhere a guitar played a lazy, tropical rhythm that made my jaw tighten. She was on the balcony when I woke. Her robe, pale cream, fluttered in the soft breeze. In her hand, the same phone that had started to feel like a barrier between us, a small, glowing world where I wasn't welcome. "Morning," I said, voice even. She turned, smiled like nothing had happened. "You left early last night. You okay?" The way she said it, light, casual, it almost worked. If I hadn't seen that flicker in her eyes, guilt maybe, or calculation. "I just needed air," I said. "It got loud." "Yeah," she laughed softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Boys can be idiots when they drink. Don't take it personally." That line landed like a slap. Don't take it personally. I smiled, nodded, even kissed her forehead, because that's what you do when you're setting a trap. Breakfast was a study in pretense. Her friend joined us, uninvited, sliding into the seat beside her with the practiced ease of a man who believed he belonged there. "Rough night, champ," he said, half grinning, half testing. I sipped my coffee. "Not as rough as yours is about to be." He laughed, mistaking it for banter. He had no idea I'd already uploaded the first batch of screenshots to a private cloud folder, labeled with his initials. Every message between him and her, every picture, every late night, "I miss you," that wasn't meant for me. I'd gathered enough digital ghosts to haunt them both for a lifetime. By noon, I was alone. She'd gone off for a spa day with her best friend. The irony was starting to feel almost divine. I sat on the balcony, the sea stretched wide before me, my laptop open to a folder titled simply, Truth. Inside, over 100 files. Text threads, recordings, photos. Her voice whispering, "He's sweet but boring." His reply, "He'll never see it coming." They were right. I hadn't. Not then. But I saw it now, every word like a pin in a map leading to the same place, betrayal. I pressed play on one of the audio files. It was faint, muffled, recorded during a call I hadn't meant to capture. Her voice, soft, tinged with guilt. "He doesn't deserve this, but I can't stop now." A pause. Then his voice. "He'll be fine. Guys like him always land on their feet." The sound of their laughter after that was almost delicate, like glass cracking under slow pressure. That was the moment something inside me changed shape. The pain didn't fade, but it crystallized into something useful, focus. I started making calls, quietly, carefully. First, to my friend Mark, a cybersecurity analyst, the kind of man who sees patterns where others see noise. We hadn't spoken in months, not since the wedding. He picked up after 2 rings. "Ethan, man, long time, you sound different." "I need your help," I said, "and your discretion." He didn't ask why, just said, "Send me what you have." Within an hour, he'd confirmed what I already suspected, messages deleted, timestamps altered, fake work trips that matched his travel history, not hers. They weren't just careless, they were coordinated. That evening, I met them at the resort bar again. Same place, same music, but this time I wasn't there to drink. They didn't notice me at first. She was laughing. his hand just a little too close to hers. It was almost cinematic if it hadn't been so pathetic. When she finally saw me, she froze. "Ethan, I didn't think you'd come." "I like this bar," I said calmly. "Good memories." He smirked. "You sure about that?" I met his gaze steady. "Oh, I'm sure. In fact, I think tonight's going to be unforgettable." I raised my phone slightly. Not enough to be dramatic, just enough for him to see the screen. A single image displayed, a screenshot of one of their messages. Her eyes widened, his smirk faltered. Then I smiled, slow and deliberate. "You two should really clear your chat history better." The silence that followed was almost peaceful. I left them there, two ghosts in paradise, suddenly unsure which way the floor would tilt. Back in the room, I opened my laptop again. One by one, I uploaded the evidence to a hidden drive, a digital journal of betrayal. This wasn't about rage anymore. It was about balance. They had turned my love into theater. I would turn their deceit into revelation. I didn't need to shout. The truth, when timed right, is louder than any scream. I drafted an email, addressed to her parents, his parents, their mutual friends, the people whose opinions they worshipped. Attached, a carefully curated selection of proof. Nothing sensational, just the undeniable facts. The truth told quietly is sometimes the most devastating weapon of all. But I didn't send it, not yet. Revenge, like photography, is about lighting and timing. You wait for the perfect moment, golden hour, when everything is bathed in truth and shadow at once. And that moment was coming. That night she returned late. The scent of wine clung to her like confession. "You left me there," she said, voice trembling slightly. "You embarrassed me." I turned from the window. "Did I?" She flinched at the tone. I'd never spoken like that before, calm, flat, surgical. "What's happening to you?" she whispered. "I stopped pretending," I said simply. She looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. Maybe she was finally seeing what she'd made. Later, when she slept, I stood on the balcony and watched the stars scatter across the sea. My reflection ghosted faintly in the glass, the same face, but something in the eyes had shifted. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Just clarity. Every story has a turning point. That night was mine. Because from that moment on, I wasn't the betrayed husband. I was the narrator. And I was about to start writing the rest of the story, my way. There's a strange kind of silence that comes before revelation, not the peace of resolution, but the tension before a storm breaks. That morning, the ocean was still. The resort's infinity pool shimmered like a mirror reflecting a lie too perfect to last. Somewhere behind me, I could hear her humming, the same song she used to sing when she cooked for me back home. The same voice, the same woman, but everything beneath it had changed. I'd spent the night replaying our years together, every smile, every small kindness, wondering which moments were real and which were rehearsed. The truth, I realized, wasn't clean. It never is. Even liars love sometimes, just not enough. I met her in the lobby that afternoon, dressed neatly, a calmness she didn't trust in my posture. "Where are you going?" she asked, clutching her sunglasses. "An interview," I said. She blinked. "What?" I smiled softly. "Don't worry, you'll see soon enough." At a small cafe near the beach, I sat with my laptop open. The resort Wi-Fi was terrible, but it didn't matter. I wasn't rushing. Timing mattered more than speed. I began building the web. Every message, every photo, every recording. But not dumped carelessly, arranged. I wove a timeline. I made it clean, elegant, undeniable. A digital confession they had written themselves. When it was done, I titled the folder, "For Those Who Deserve the Truth." And then I began to share. Not to social media, no, I wasn't interested in chaos or gossip. I sent it privately, to the people whose opinions they feared most. Her parents first, two conservative souls who'd adored me for my steadiness. His girlfriend next, the one who had messaged me congratulations after our wedding, blissfully unaware of the affair. Then their close circle of friends, the ones who laughed too easily at that bar, who thought loyalty was a punchline. I wrote a single line in each email. I thought you deserved to know what really happened, Ethan. Then I pressed send. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The sky above the resort was pure blue, the kind of color you only see when everything is about to fall apart. Then my phone buzzed. Once, twice, then continuously. Messages poured in disbelief, apologies, outrage. One from her father. Is this real? Another from his girlfriend. You saved me years of lies, thank you. It was done. The truth was no longer mine alone to carry. When I returned to the suite, she was standing by the window, her phone clutched like a weapon. Her face was pale, her mascara streaked. You did this, she whispered. I didn't answer. Her phone buzzed again. She threw it onto the bed like it had burned her. He left me, Ethan. He said his girlfriend showed him everything. Her voice cracked, but I couldn't tell if it was heartbreak or anger. I poured myself a glass of water, watching the liquid tremble. You once told me you wanted honesty in your marriage, I said quietly. Now you have it. She stared at me, 100 emotions fighting for space in her expression. Guilt, fury, shame, maybe buried deep regret. You've destroyed me, she said. I met her gaze. No, you destroyed yourself. I just turned the lights on. Word spread faster than I expected. Her family called. His friends vanished. Photos disappeared from social media within hours. And the resort, that beautiful hollow paradise, suddenly felt like the stage after a play ends. Empty, too quiet. She spent the evening crying in the bathroom. I didn't stop her. There was a time I would have knelt beside her, whispered comfort. But that version of me had been buried somewhere between the first lie and the last laugh. That night I walked along the shore alone. The waves crashed softly, indifferent witnesses. My reflection followed me, dark, rippling, half-stranger. I thought I would feel triumph, justice, maybe even relief. But what I felt was weight. Revenge doesn't free you. It just shifts the burden from your chest to your hands. And now those hands were stained, not with guilt but with finality. I stopped at the edge of the water and whispered to the sea. She's gone now, isn't she? The wind didn't answer, but the tide pulled gently at my feet as if to say, yes, but so are you. When I returned, she was sitting on the balcony, her eyes swollen but distant. The kind of look people get when they finally run out of lies. I don't hate you, she said softly. I wish I could. I sat opposite her. The moonlight made everything look fragile. I don't hate you either, I said. I just wish I'd never loved you enough to let this hurt so much. She looked away, tears catching the light. What happens now? I took a deep breath. Now we go home separately. The next morning she didn't fight it. She didn't beg or argue. We packed in silence, two people untangling a shared life, item by item. At the airport, she turned to me one last time. I'll never forgive you, she said quietly. I nodded. I don't need forgiveness, I just need peace. And for the first time in months, I meant it. On the flight home, the clouds looked endless, a soft white field stretching beyond sight. I closed my eyes, leaned back, and for the first time since this all began, I allowed myself to breathe. The exposure was done. The truth was out. But what comes after the storm isn't always sunshine. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's rebirth. And sometimes it's both. Coming home after destruction is strange. The streets look the same cracked sidewalks, the same flickering streetlight outside my apartment. But I was. It felt like returning to the site of a fire long after the smoke had cleared, when the air still carries the ghost of what used to burn. My suitcase thudded softly against the hardwood floor. The apartment was quiet, dust particles drifting in the late afternoon light like lazy snowfall. On the kitchen counter, the framed photo of us from our honeymoon still stood, her hand in mine, both of us smiling at a future we didn't yet know was already ending. I didn't touch it. Not yet. The first night back was the hardest. Silence has a way of amplifying everything you try to bury. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock, even the soft wind outside, all of it sounded like accusation. I tried to sleep, but my mind replayed every moment of that trip. The laughter, the betrayal, the look in her eyes when she realized her world had collapsed. And underneath it all, one question that wouldn't leave me alone. Was I any better than them now? Justice had felt righteous at the time, but in the quiet, it was heavy, a beautiful weapon that left me scarred too. Days passed in fragments. Coffee gone cold. Emails unread. A dozen missed calls from people who just wanted to check in. I ignored most of them. The noise of pity felt unbearable. But one evening, when the city was dipped in gold and the air smelled faintly of rain, I found myself answering a call from someone I hadn't expected. Joy. She'd been my coworker once, always kind, always patient, the kind of person who listens more than she talks. "Hey," she said gently, "I heard what happened." I almost hung up, but something in her tone, not pity, not curiosity, just quiet understanding, made me stay. "I'm fine," I said automatically. "I know you're not," she said, "but you will be." That silence that followed was soft, not the sharp silence of guilt or anger, but something that felt almost human again. A week later, I met her for coffee. Not a date, just a reminder that life still existed outside the wreckage. She smiled when she saw me, a small, real smile that didn't ask for explanation. We talked about work, movies, little things that didn't demand vulnerability. And when I laughed, a genuine laugh, not the hollow kind I'd grown used to, I realized how long it had been since I'd heard my own voice sound like that. "See," she said, teasing lightly, "still human after all." I smiled barely. But for the first time, I believed it. Nights were easier after that. I started writing again, not revenge notes or evidence logs, but reflections, thoughts, fragments of who I used to be before everything broke. Sometimes I'd catch myself typing her name and stopping halfway. Sometimes I'd delete entire paragraphs because they sounded too much like mourning. And slowly, the apartment began to change. The framed photo came down. The empty wine glasses went into a box. The air felt lighter, like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. A month passed before I heard from her again. It was late, nearly midnight, when her name lit up my phone. I almost ignored it, but curiosity, that quiet, cruel thing, made me answer. Her voice was small, trembling. "Ethan, I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I didn't speak. "I know you'll never forgive me," she continued, "but I need you to know I didn't plan for any of this. It just happened." I closed my eyes. Her words were the same soft excuses I'd once clung to, but they didn't sting anymore. They just passed through me like wind through hollow spaces. "I hope you find peace," I said finally. And I meant it. Because forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting yourself walk out. After that, I stopped looking back. Joy and I began to see each other more often, slowly, without rush, like two people relearning how to be gentle. She never asked about the past. I never forced the future. We just were. Some nights, we'd walk by the river, the city lights stretching across the water like fractured constellations. "You ever think about what could have been?" she asked one night. "Sometimes," I said, "but I try not to live in hypotheticals anymore. They're just ghosts of choices we didn't make." She smiled, tucking her hair behind her ear. That's a nice way to put it. Yeah, I said quietly. It's taken me a while to learn. Months later, I got a letter handwritten, unmarked, familiar. Sorry. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity again is stubborn. Inside was a single page. You were right. The truth hurt more than I ever imagined, but thank you. You forced me to see myself. I hope someday you find someone who never makes you doubt a thing. There was no return address. Just the faint scent of the perfume she used to wear. I didn't cry. I just folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer, and went out to meet Joy for dinner. That night, as we sat under the soft hum of city lights, Joy laughed at something I said, a bright, easy sound. And for a moment, I realized something that almost felt poetic. Sometimes, destruction is the only way to rebuild. Sometimes, ashes are just the soil where something honest can grow. I looked at her, at the warmth in her eyes, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, not revenge, not victory. Peace. Morning light spilled through the curtains, soft and golden, the kind of light that didn't demand to be noticed, yet changed everything it touched. I woke to that light, to the faint sound of rain kissing the balcony, and for a fleeting moment I forgot the weight of everything that had led me here. The wars, the betrayals, the silence, all of it felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else in another lifetime. Joy was still asleep beside me, her hair brushing lightly against my shoulder. There was a steadiness in her breathing that calmed something deep inside me. I watched her for a while, not out of longing but gratitude, because for the first time in years I wasn't haunted. I was just here. They say time heals all wounds. But that's not true. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to carry the scars without bleeding from them. I carried mine quietly. Some nights when the rain got heavy or a familiar scent brushed past me in a crowd, old memories would resurface, sharp, uninvited. But they no longer dictated who I was. They were reminders of where I'd been, not definitions of where I was going. One afternoon, months later, I visited the old resort again. Not to relive anything, just to see it as it truly was, stripped of meaning. The ocean looked the same, vast, indifferent, eternal. The same horizon that had once watched me shatter now shimmered with gentle golds and blues. I sat by the water for hours, watching the waves erase footprints in the sand. And it hit me. This is what healing looks like. Not grand closure, not cinematic confrontation, just silence, just the ability to sit where you once fell apart and feel nothing but calm. Later that evening, I found a local cafe near the cliffside, small, quiet, filled with the smell of roasted beans and salt air. I ordered a coffee, sat by the window, and pulled out my old journal. The pages were filled with ghosts, fragments of anger, heartbreak, vengeance. But as I read through them, I didn't flinch. I smiled. At the bottom of the last page, I wrote something new. There's beauty in endings if you look closely enough. Because every ending is just a quiet beginning disguised as loss. Then I closed the book. When I returned home, Joy greeted me with that same soft warmth, the kind that made the world feel survivable again. She didn't ask where I'd been. She didn't need to. We stood on the balcony, the city glowing beneath us. The air was cool, the moon hanging low and full. She slipped her hand into mine. "You look lighter," she said. "I feel lighter," I admitted. "It's strange." "Good strange. The best kind." She smiled, that easy, luminous smile, and leaned her head against my shoulder. For a long while we just stood there in silence, watching the city breathe. There's a quiet that follows pain, not the emptiness of loss but the stillness of peace, the kind that whispers, "You've survived. You can rest now." In that stillness, I finally understood something simple but profound. Forgiveness wasn't about her. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about reclaiming myself. The parts I'd lost trying to prove my worth to people who never deserved it. And now, standing in the quiet dawn of my own becoming, I knew I'd finally done it. Epilogue 1 year later. The book I'd been writing, not about betrayal but about resilience, finally got published. It wasn't a bestseller. It didn't need to be. It was honest, raw, and real. People who'd been broken read it and wrote to me saying, it helped me feel seen. Joy and I moved into a small house near the coast. On weekends, we'd paint or read or just watch the waves roll in. Sometimes she'd ask about the past, not out of jealousy but curiosity. And I'd tell her pieces, not all of it, just enough to show that even pain, when given time, can turn into something worth learning from. She'd listen quietly, then smile. And I'd smile back, knowing that not all love stories need grand gestures. Some just need patience and peace. One morning, standing by the window as the dawn broke open in shades of gold and rose, I whispered to myself, "This is what freedom looks like. Not revenge. Not vindication. Just quiet, unshakable peace." And for the first time in my life, that was enough. The end.